So I really wanted to like this one because it is from Canada and I wanted to support my country. We don't get a lot of Canadian sci-fi, but I didn't like it. Now, I'll talk really, really briefly without spoiling the central premise, and then later on, I'll spoil the central premise, which isn't much of a spoiler because you find it out very early. Now, there's websites that have big lists of science fiction jumping off points, and they're concepts that are very cool, very high concept, easy to communicate with people, very gimmicky, and I feel like this movie just took one of those concepts, which is a very cool concept, but then they didn't have the resources, the money to have good visuals, any special effects, really anything to draw big name actors. They didn't have any of the money necessary to make it kind of a blockbuster success, which I think this concept could have been if you had someone like Miles Teller or something playing the lead. And they also didn't have the understanding of why this concept is interesting, the themes that it's trying to explore, and or the writing ability to create really good dialogue. The dialogue is pretty forgettable. There's nothing I'd really want to write down. Any quotes that really jumped out at me. And the visuals, again, I'll put the best visuals behind me, but you can see there's really not that much there. And I really didn't like the performances by the two lead actors. I thought they were very bland, very forgettable. And now I'm going to spoil the premise, so if you want to go in completely fresh, don't watch anymore. So a guy wakes up with amnesia, he can't remember who he is, and anyone who gets within a certain radius of him drops dead, unless there's this woman who also doesn't remember anything about her. Unless she's beside him, then the radius is neutralized and nobody dies. Now, the addition of her neutralizing his radius, I thought was quite good, and I thought that was going, the people behind this movie, they took a cool concept and they went one step, one level up, and I liked that, but then there's nothing else that they really did with this concept. Now, I think this movie could work better as a kind of erotic thriller, a bit of romance thrown in there, and I think it's, to some extent, a funny concept. You're a guy and you tell a woman, hey, you've got to stay close to me, otherwise the whole world's going to die. It could have been a very humorous, there was some situational comedy that I felt wasn't in the movie's favor, like when he gets in the elevator and he has this power to murder everybody, but he's daydreaming in the elevator, so he doesn't realize that she's not in the elevator with him and the door's closed. It was that the movie swung from, it started with this really cool, mind-bending sci-fi concept, and then I thought it shifted into just a basic thriller chase, which I thought could have been cool. Again, the fact that everyone can die if they don't stay together, that's a really interesting wrinkle that made these chase scenes more interesting. Then I felt it shifted into kind of this bad comedy where she's running down the stairs after the elevator, and it never really settled on a theme, and none of them really worked. And then thematically, again, they had this really cool concept, but I don't think they really explored any of the interesting issues of whether he had like a moral obligation to kill himself to prevent these future deaths, because he was just such a inherently powerful weapon through no means of his own. They could have shown him trying to learn to live without human contact in isolation, going crazy, talking to the people on TV, maybe eventually losing his mind and rampaging through the city, murdering people. There are just so many interesting things they could have done, and I feel like they didn't do it. They could have shown him learning to live in isolation and becoming famous, becoming this novelty attraction, and him conducting these celebrity interviews from his isolation, and kind of the statement about how celebrity isolates you and drives you crazy. But anyways, they didn't do any of that. What they did do, and now I will spoil the ending because I want to talk about the direction I think they took it, why it didn't really make sense, and thematically wasn't very powerful. So it turns out this guy is a serial killer, and he has a lot of victims. He kills one sister, and then that wasn't enough for him. He, I guess, stalks and follows the other sister, dealing with her grief, waits until she's eventually at the point of killing herself, jumping off a bridge, and then he, to some extent, talks her down. Then he slips up and he says, well, don't worry about your sister. And she says, well, how do you know I have a sister? And then they struggle. There's a car crash. Then a lightning bolt strikes the earth, this kind of cosmic event, as it's called on the news, and this wipes both their memories and also gives him this killing power and gives her this neutralizing power. And it was kind of a cool twist. I like the dramatic music, the dawning realization in their eyes. She's flipping through the book, realizing she was going to be his next victim. But I didn't philosophically, I didn't think it was saying anything interesting. So if you're saying that it's memories that can lead someone to be evil and do these evil things, because he was a serial killer, not just any serial killer, a really serious serial killer with a lot of victims, and then him just losing his memory, if that's all it didn't rewire his brain chemistry or genetics, if all it did was give him amnesia and this killing power, why is it, so it's saying that his memories, his childhood, his upbringing, to some extent that caused him to be a serial killer. I guess that's interesting. I don't agree with it. I think that oftentimes serial killers, it's things like a lack of conscience, a lack of empathy. It's those things that, so unless him getting zapped gave him a conscience, gave him this empathy, and it wasn't clear that it did that. So I just think it didn't really get serial killers right or what causes evil right. And if the whole thing is God or some kind of cosmic power or fate trying to teach him a lesson and lead him on the redemptive path where he realizes the error of his many, many murders, then he kills so many people in this movie. If you add up the body count, he murders so many innocent people. So to murder that many innocent people just to teach him a lesson, at the end of which he kills himself, seems an incredibly convoluted and silly way, and not silly, incredibly convoluted and evil and immoral way to teach him this lesson. And I guess if you look at it as a metaphor, because of his crimes in his past life that he can't remember, being a serial killer, in this life, he's unable to really connect with anyone because they die if they get close to him, except through the grace and the goodness of this woman who in this past life he caused so much hurt to. And I guess it's poetic, kind of ironic. Maybe I'm being hard on this. I really like the concept. I think it was a really cool sci-fi concept. So I was a little disappointed with the handling. I thought the execution was poor in the final result, the final movie. Not really something I'd want to watch again. It's watchable. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're a fan of sci-fi, you can watch it. I'll just compare it to the sci-fi I just saw that's getting savaged by critics, Mute. I think that's a much better movie by almost any measure, but if you want to watch every sci-fi movie that comes out, I guess give this one a go.